Sharon Squire, and as president of the Canadian Club of Ottawa, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Women in Public Life Luncheon, brought to you in partnership with Equal Voice.
My name is Carrie Ann Taylor, and I'm an executive member of Equal Voice's Ottawa chapter. Ladies and gentlemen, Elizabeth May comes to her understanding of the importance of women in politics naturally and honestly. Her mother was a passionate and active campaigner against nuclear weapons, as well as a prominent member of the Democratic Party in the US. Ms. May has long recognized the crucial role that women can play on the international stage. The World Women's Congress for a Healthy Planet in 1991, which was an important precursor to the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio, is one such example. Being admitted to the Order of Canada and receiving the United Nations Global Award are just two of the awards Ms. May has received for her work as a lawyer and environmentalist. Today, she is setting the standard for the next generation of female politicians. Ms. May made history when she was elected to the House of Commons in this year's general election, becoming Canada's first ever Green Party Member of Parliament. She is also currently the only woman in the House who is an elected party leader. Her daughter, Victoria Kate, appears ready to continue this family tradition of public service. After many years of working by her mother's side on environmental issues, she was elected as a youth organizer for the Green Party and is well on her way towards blazing her own trail. I'm not sure if Victoria is here today, but I am confident that she'd be proud of her mother receiving this Eve Award. In the male-dominated world of politics, Ms. May is a woman who has unwaveringly held her own, refusing to be limited by circumstances or the expectations of others. We are excited to hear her story about her life in politics. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Elizabeth May.
Thank you. Thanks, Carrie Ann. Thank you, Sharon. Thanks to Equal Voice, the Canadian Club, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and many others. TELUS. I'm trying to remember all the names of sponsors for the event, but the organizers have to do that. I just want to say thank you to everyone, because this is a huge honor. My daughter, Victoria Kate, is at the moment writing exams in Halifax at King's College, where she's studying philosophy. And certainly if you go into politics, it helps to be philosophical. So it's not a bad background. My daughter is represented today by one of my dearest friends who used to teach her in chorus at St. Bartholomew's Church. The youth chorus was directed by my friend Roz. So Roz is here instead of Victoria Kate. I'm extremely pleased that after all, I want to mention one person who snuck in late, because I think it's worth mentioning. We've had all the MPs and parliamentarians who are here, senators stand up. I appreciate that a lot. Being a Nova Scotian for years, I used to say Robert Stanfield was the best prime minister we ever had. But being a Green, I've had to amend that to Stéphane Dion is the best prime minister we never had. So winning an award like this and trying to figure out what I could say in the time allotted to me without treading onto any issues that might be partisan or controversial, and certainly, please God, don't mention the villainy about pulling us out of Kyoto, I had to rethink, had to be very careful, and I decided to talk about things that I think I can talk about, and that's women who have been my role models. And the first two are easy, and Carrie Ann, we never talked ahead of time, but she nailed it. My mom was my most important mentor and role model. She passed away 8 years ago. If she was here, I tell you, she'd be in the room. She didn't miss anything, but she was a young mom, and in the old 1950s way of being a housewife, she was a stay-at-home mom and found out that nuclear weapons testing was spreading strontium-90 fallout all around the planet and was indiscriminately going to increase childhood leukemia. And that's what made her an activist. She figured, it wasn't exactly in Dr. Spock, Baby and Child Care, thou must protest. Although later, Dr. Spock became an important part of that campaign, posing in a full-page New York Times ad with his hands on the shoulders of a very little girl, and the headline was, Dr. Spock is worried. That was one of the things that motivated governments around the world to stop atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons. So when I was in first grade and saw President Kennedy, not in person of course, but I see pictures, signing the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty against atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons, I learned a really important lesson. My mommy did that, and I was sure it was, it was a lot of mommies, it was more than just mine, but it was largely women activists at the grassroots level who made that happen. And I participated with my mom in many campaigns, being her little sidekick, going around with her to everything. And it trained me. What can I say? I learned how to be a grassroots activist. I learned how to give a speech in front of a room full of people. People used to ask my mom, and I'd overhear them saying, "Stephanie, aren't you afraid? You stand up in front of all those, usually men, and you give those speeches and you're not scared." And she'd say, "Of course I'm scared. But before I give my speech, I just tell myself, I'm Eleanor Roosevelt." And she would pretend to be somebody she wasn't till she got so good at it, that. Anyway, I learned a lot from my mom, and I have to say that as much as I learned from my mother, I've learned just as much, if not more, from my daughter, who, like in the same replication of family life history, as my mother used to bring me along. I can remember, before I could, well, I think I could walk, but my first press conference was when I was 2. I didn't play a role in speaking to the issue, but I was at a panel. I was on a dais with my mom and an assortment of Nobel Prize winners. My mom and 17 Nobel Prize winners were suing the governments of the United States, the Soviet Union, and the UK to stop nuclear weapons testing. So I was involved quite early. And in the same way, my daughter, Victoria Kate, came with me on every mission, every journey. Before she was 1, we were at the Rio Earth Summit. I mentioned this when we were in Durban. We did a press conference. I said, it's almost, it's 20 years since the Rio Earth Summit. And when I think about progress, I look at my daughter. She's gone from baby to impressive grown woman, going through her 3rd year, and I think, gee, all those agreements are still crawling around on the floor, and my daughter's all grown up. But anyway, it gives you a framework around and a time frame around lessons. And my daughter's taught me a lot, and one of the things she's taught me is to always be careful about thinking, as my mom told me, anybody can do anything. And my daughter's taught me humility to know that even though you think you can do everything, you shouldn't go around telling everyone you can. My role models in politics, and I picked 2, and one of them is a former recipient of the Eve Award. My role models in politics are from the 2 different countries in which I grew up in the States and moved when I was 18 to Cape Breton Island. So I went from Bella Abzug as a role model to Flora MacDonald as a role model. They've both become and were, we lost Bella a number of years ago, but to my great joy, Bella Abzug became a friend of mine, Flora MacDonald became a friend of mine. Both taught me a lot, both encouraged me a lot. Carrie Ann, actually, again, the way you put together that intro is amazing because it keeps touching back on things I was going to say. Bella was the organizer for the World Women's Congress for a Healthy Planet, which we held in Miami, Florida in 1991, 6 months before the Earth Summit. She put together a panel of women from around the world, which meant she gave me a chance to become friends with the founder of the German Green Party, Petra Kelly, to become friends with Vandana Shiva and Wangari Maathai, who just passed away this year. But Bella also had a great way of putting things. So I went through some of the things that Bella had said, and I loved this one. She said, they used to give us a day. It was called International Women's Day. In 1975, they gave us a year, the year of the woman. And then from 1975 to 1985, they gave us a decade, the decade of the woman. And I said at the time, who knows? If we behave, they may let us into the whole thing. But we didn't behave, and here we are. So she taught me a lot about organizing. She taught me a lot about the role of women in politics. And I found out why she always, how many of you even know who Bella Abzug is? Probably not as many as I would think. Bella Abzug was one of the first women to get elected to Congress in the United States as a Democrat from Brooklyn, New York. She was a fierce Democrat, a fierce partisan. If you want to see a slice of Bella, I can't remember which Woody Allen movie it is in which she plays herself in one of those funny little Woody Allen New York moments. But she was an incredible activist and strong feminist, and she wrote the book called The Gender Gap. in which she talks about why aren't there more women in politics. And it's as relevant now as when she wrote it in the 60s. Why aren't there more women in politics? So Bella was a tremendous role model for me. When she left the Congress of the United States, she became involved in global environmental issues, and she made a point of tracking the whole Rio process. And again, I learned a lot from her. She was famous for wearing really big hats. And I found out why she did that. She'd gone, when she was a young lawyer, she'd show up for meetings in law firms in New York and say, Bella Abzug, I'm here for the plaintiff. And they'd let her sit there. And after a while, she'd say, why are we waiting? They'd say, we're waiting for the lawyer. She'd say, I'm the lawyer. I'm the lawyer. So her husband told her, Bella, wear a hat. Secretaries don't wear hats. So she started wearing this big hat, and as a result of that, people knew in a meeting she wasn't the girl to be sent out for the coffee. Sometimes I realize we've actually made some progress. I was watching they're not old reruns now, they're things a new television series that captures what it was like in the 60s to be a woman. And it's Mad Men. And when Don Draper said to somebody, I'll get my girl to do that, and my daughter turned and said, Mommy, did people used to talk like that? Did that could really happen? I said, oh yeah, that really happened. That was how it was. So we've made progress. Flora MacDonald is a role model for me because she, to me, exemplified and personified dignity in the House of Commons. Her ramrod straight back, her ability to handle questions with grace and dignity when all around her there was a certain amount of squabbling, and of course, being a Cape Bretoner who moved away, I've always really identified with Flora, and now, of course, as many of you will know, in her 80s, she remains active in northern Afghanistan delivering aid. So she's somebody to be honored and and I'm so thrilled to share an award with Flora. That's a huge honor. But what I wanted to say briefly is that one of these things that these women have taught me, and one of the things that feminism has taught me, and even more than that, one step more, ecofeminism has taught me, is that we don't succeed when we merely take our place in a man's world and leave the man's world as it is. It doesn't work. It leaves things as unfair and patriarchal as they always were before, but they put women in a few positions of responsibility. We don't fundamentally change society. And I found a good reference to this in one of my favorite ecofeminist theologists. Did you know there are ecofeminist theologists? But I recommend to you, anyone who's interested, in Rosemary Radford Ruether, who's written some extraordinary stuff. I mean, basically what she postulates is that as long as societies and economies are based on exploitation and domination, it will inevitably lead to patriarchy, racism, sexism, and environmental devastation. If we relate to each other in terms of domination and exploitation, that affects relations between the genders, it reflects how we treat each other, it reflects classes. So one of the things that Rosemary Radford Ruether said was, quote, a revolution in female roles into the male work world without a corresponding revolution in male roles leaves the basic pattern of patriarchal exploitation of women untouched. Women are simply overworked in a new way, expected to do both the male workday at low pay and also the unpaid work of women that sustain family life. Now, we're talking about women in politics, and there's not a more difficult, combative, toxic, testosterone-choked world out there than political life. We need to reform politics. We need to have it be a place where more women will want to be involved. To have more women in politics, we need to reform that world, to make it culturally acceptable to people who want to accomplish things that really matter, who aren't satisfied with power for its own sake. Now, that'll rule out most of the people who achieve success in politics. We need people to achieve success in politics who are interested in social change, regardless of who succeeds, regardless of who gets the brass ring. We need to change political culture so that the hideous behavior in the House of Commons and the cruelty of some of the heckling is viewed as unacceptable as bullying in a high school. We need to exemplify and model the kind of behavior we'd like to see throughout society. And if you look at the House of Commons, we're not there yet. We're 25% women in the House of Commons right now. When we're 50% women in the House of Commons, I think you'll see a difference. But how do we get to the 50% women in the House of Commons when the kind of behavior and the political culture is so difficult to tolerate, when all you really want is a better world for your kids? It's a very tough question. It's the ultimate chicken and egg problem. The more women we have in politics, the better it will get. But can we get women in politics until it gets better? So I'm thrilled to see so many of my colleagues here. I hope you'll forgive me because I'm putting them on a spot and I didn't warn them. But I want you to see the faces of the women in politics that give me hope. The new faces of women in politics. I want to ask my friends from the NDP caucus, Lauren Liu and Annie Quash, to stand up, because these are the women who are going to be leading us. You guys. This is what's happening in politics in Canada. And when people said, what about that NDP caucus, all those new young ones? Guess what? Worry about the old white guys. These women know what they're doing, and every single day they do a great job. Sorry about that. So I want to thank you for giving me this enormous honor. I am deeply honored. Awards in life, when you're doing things that seem, and nothing has seemed as difficult as the last few days, not for a very long time in my life. An award like this is enormously encouraging, because I may have accomplished a few things, but we're just, as far as I can see, in terms of my lifespan, I'm 57 now, and I haven't accomplished anything that matters yet. I'm not satisfied until I'm absolutely sure that my children can live out their normal lifespan and their children can live out their normal lifespan on a planet that sustains life and not one that has moved into catastrophic, accelerating destruction of life support systems. We're on the cusp of that kind of moment of, are we safe? Are we not? What are our chances? Are they good? Are they not? Right now, they're not good. And so I feel as though at 57, I better have a lot more years left, because we've got a lot of work to do. And the more women who can find ways to work outside the partisanship, beyond the nastiness, and focus on what matters. And what matters is that we leave this world safe for our children. And that is why my mom got active. That's why I'm active. That's why my daughter is active. And it's the only thing that matters. Elevating one's political party to greater power is about the most useless thing you can dedicate your life to. Making sure that the time you spend in public life makes the kind of change you want to see in the world. That's all that matters. Thank you very much.